And it's at that point, that I started to get a bizarre sense of oneness and acceptance and peace, yet at the same time sitting somewhere else in my box was this feeling of sort of annoyance and anger and resentment that my life had been ended this way. And I can just remember my last words to the effect of something, I can remember it was something like, I was getting really angry and I was getting really passionate, and why does this have to happen to me? My life has been completely useless, and I haven't really fulfilled a lot of the dreams, a lot of the passions that I should have done. We always put these things and think we're going to do them on a rainy day, and it never comes. I was just angry at myself of not living life fully and doing all the amazing things that I wanted. I wanted to write, I wanted to travel. And at that very point, this calmness come into me. This voice, and we all have these voices in our head, it's our conscience, our intuition, but this voice was stronger and more poignant than ever before. And bearing in mind, I was an atheist back then. I didn't really believe in anything. If I couldn't touch it, feel it, measure it, I was the total pragmatic. And at this point, I got to a stage where I just let go, and this voice came in and it said, Bill, do you really believe that your life has been a waste? And I just angrily answered yes, without even thinking what this voice was. Then it came back in the most soft and beautiful and unbelievably sort of calm and compassionate manner. It was the words of along the lines of, I tell you this, each of us, as even if we live but an hour on this earth, we've made a massive contribution to life. And then the incredible thing is, I started getting into a dialogue with this I call it a presence. It's a bit like your conscience and the voice that runs through your head, except every question that I'd ever had of life seemed to be answered. And there was this two-way conversation going on. I couldn't explain it. It was bizarre. It was totally out of the realm of what I was believed or used to, but some communication with something between me and this, what I call as the presence, was going on. Once this conversation had completely sort of answered everything I really basically wanted to know and had all the questions I'd had of my life, I suddenly sort of closed my eyes and I realised I'm in a hallway. And the hallway is an old house that I was living at the time. It's 200 years old. I'm at the back of the hallway and I open my eyes and I'm in this hallway. And I look to see if my hands are there. And they're not. And I realise I'm a presence, but I can't see my physical body. And anyway, I look up towards the front door, and I suddenly realise my wife and my two young children are standing by the front door, and there's a big knock. And she goes to answer the door, and there's a policewoman and a policeman standing there at the door. My children are sobbing, my wife's crying, and they say, Mrs. Murtha, I'm sorry to inform you that your husband, as you know, disappeared a week, and we've just found his body washed up on Teignmouth Beach, which is 5 miles up the coastline, and I'm sorry, you're going to have to come and identify the body with these possessions. And they broke down uncontrollably, and there was something going on inside of me, whatever I was at that time, an energy, an entity, a presence, whatever, it just suddenly, my chest and my whole body, just, if I had a chest, just seemed to suddenly warm and explode, and I just suddenly had this insightful knowledge that oh my God, I've died, and this is it, and this is what I'm now seeing and living afterwards. And then there was another knowing that instantly came in and said, no, this is an option. You haven't died, or you could do if you want to, but this is an option. And as much as I'd relaxed then into this amazing nowhere place of sort of peace and serenity and calm, I just suddenly had this feeling that no, my life is not over. I've got other things to do, to achieve, to complete. And I decided that no, I didn't want to die. And the very strange thing is, at the second I made that decision, all the images of the hallway, my wife, the police disappeared, and I opened my eyes and I'm back in the water, and it's suddenly as if like somebody turned the volume up to the extreme cold and the noise suddenly, and I'm back in the water and I'm thrashing around, probably 100 metres away from the coastline. It's dark by now, I can see all the lights in the distance up in the town, And I'm thinking, what has just happened there? And anyway, I was confused because I thought, well, I've made a decision to live now. Who's going to save me? And I remember looking up, and in the distance, way in, the distance up in the town, there was this tiny little light, and it was so far away I couldn't even see if it was a male or a female, but I could see a silhouette of a top floor flat, and someone was clearly there. And the bizarre thing is, I did something that I've never ever done up until that point of my life. I just started to pray. And it was like instinctual. It wasn't something that I'd, rehearsed or something I'd done before in church. I didn't go to church. I was an atheist. But it was almost like at the very point close to death, you instinctually pray. And I started to pray that this person could see me. And then, logic came in, and I thought, oh, that's ridiculous. I can't even see them. How on earth can they see me? And anyway, I turned away, and I'm still trying to desperately keep afloat, and I'm starting to freeze again. I could, everything was numb. I couldn't feel my hands and my feet. And anyway, I heard this shout, and I turned round, thinking that it was in my, half-heartedly thinking it was in my imagination. Anyway, I see this guy, I presumed it was a guy because he was quite bulky, on the quayside, waving his arms, shouting. And do you know what? The stupid thing is, he shouted out, "Do you need help?" And do you know what? The stupid thing is, it's probably the best thing he could ever say, because I can remember thinking, after going through all of that, I'm thinking, what do you think I'm doing there? Pitch black night in the winter, thrashing around in the sea. Of course I need help. And I almost wanted, I was so angry, I wanted to smack him, that I thought, this is, I need to live now, because I want to grab this guy by the throat. And anyway, at a point, he managed to, somehow he managed with a group of people to fire a buoy out to me. I managed to grab the buoy, they pulled it in, and that's where I smashed all my ribs up. Anyway, they got me to an ambulance, and I knew it was serious because I could sort of, in and out of consciousness, I could hear the ambulance driver speaking to his friend, about we need to get him back to Torquay Hospital quickly and get his temperature up. So I knew it was touch and go, and I knew I was in and out of consciousness. Anyway, I managed to pull through that night, and the next morning, the nurse came up and she said, I've tried to tell this guy to go away, but there's the newspaper editor and reporter and photographer here, they want to sort of take a big story. And I naively thought, it can't be about the rescue. It must be about the football, because I was a big semi-professional footballer at the time, and our football team were doing really well, and we were close to Wembley final and all that. And anyway, it was nothing to do with that. And I went for this interview with this guy, and he said, "Have you heard about the all the news reporters and the papers and everything down?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, they're all down on the seafront interviewing the guy that's rescued you and saved you." And I said, "Well, I don't know anything about it. No one's told me anything yet." And what apparently had happened, what we found out, was that this guy, Nathan, who was a local Dawlish lad, had said to his friend in the flat below, and he'd been saying to him for 9 months, "Look, can you lend me your telescope? Lend me your telescope." And it's one of these situations where he was saying, "Yeah, I'll do it next week, do it next week." Anyway, next week became 9 months. And the strange thing is, on the very afternoon of the evening that I went in the water, Nathan's friend finally brought round this telescope. And he set it up for him, and he looked, looked up at the moon, set it all up. Anyway, in the evening, he said, this is Nathan's story, which he told me about after, which just left chills down my spine. Nathan said, I set the telescope up, it was dark. He said, I went away to make a drink. He said, I came back, and the telescope had dropped. He said, I can't work it out. He said, I'm absolutely sure that I'd sort of done the telescope screw up and pointed it upwards. And he said, the bizarre thing is, he said, I should have just recorrected it and, back up towards the full moon and got on with it. And he said, I didn't. He said, there was this instinctual feeling to look through the telescope where it was pointing down towards the dark sea. And he said, there was nothing to look at. He said, all I could see is, sea and waves and the moonlight skimming across the surface. And he said, I looked through the telescope, and incredibly, he said, I thought I saw, first of all, a thrashing around large seagull. And he said he looked again and he realised it was their head. And he said at that point, he just went and called the the Coast Guard, and but it really freaked him out. And he told me this a couple of days after when we finally met for the papers. He took a photo and a big story, and it was in a lot of local and national newspapers because it was a good story about a telescope. But that in itself just sort of really just threw me, because it sort of, at that point, it just showed me that there's something else going on under the surface that we don't. The coincidences and the synchronicity was just so great. It really started me on a journey.
So, after your near-death experience, you must have dramatically altered your perspective overnight. What changes did you implement straight away? Did you leave your manic lifestyle behind, so to speak? Was your thinking any different? What meaning did you take from the accident?
I think when you speak to a lot of people that have had critical illnesses or sudden near deaths, I think we're all in part of that club, is that actually nothing happens, or a change doesn't happen overnight. It's more of a slow burn. And I think what happens to all of us is you've had something happen to you that is so dramatic and so life-changing that for several months after, you're in a part of denial. You're in this space where you can't quite take on board, particularly if you've had phenomena happen to me, like what happened in the water with the presence, the voice, the conversation, the reruns. That went totally against what the chance with the telescope, the guy that I was looking up at and praying to. So many things came together that I just didn't want to know. That it was easier for me to forget everything, forget all the bizarre stuff. I mean, I can remember my managing director ringing me up the day after the accident, and he said, I saw it in the local Express newspaper, and he said, I can't believe it happened to you. And he said, look, take 2 weeks off, and we'll keep sort of running, and you go and see somebody, and if you need a month, 2 months, fine. And do you know what I did? I went back to work on the Wednesday after the accident the week before, because I just didn't want to face it. Like a lot of people, I didn't want to face what had happened to me, so I just got on with life. But as these experiences, I now know, happen to us for a reason, to realign our life, to make us start changing direction, changing behaviour. I just gradually, over the months, these things started drip feeding into my consciousness and start thinking. And, I started to lose a lot of sleep. I started to think a bit more deeply about it. And it's at that point that I started to really shift my perspective.
So it wasn't really what you might call a quantum leap into the future then?
No, definitely not. I think most of us and most of the people that I've linked up with around the world, and when I've done talks and spoken to the Institute of Noetic Science or the Institute of Near-Death Studies in Switzerland, I think all of us, or most of us, come from the same experiences, that these changes happen, but they don't change us overnight. It's more of a slow burn.
Right. But eventually you did wake up to what life was trying to show you. So what was the jumping off point? Because I understand that you just suddenly decided one day to give it all up. You sold your business, you changed your job, you gave up all the flash cars. There was a subtle changing in your lifestyle in quite major ways though, really. So that all, when you lump that all together, that's pretty serious to be all changing these things at once.
Yeah, I think I needed to sort of find meaning to my life. The 80-hour weeks, the cars, the big mortgages, the bills, the credit cards. As we've all experienced, whatever we earn, we spend, and more, or most of us did. I think things are changing massively now, but we were all caught up in that. We could always earn more money. We could always do extra hours. And I think for me, I mean, I can remember this bizarre situation. I was throwing some papers out of my office, and one of my staff, I never usually did it. I usually got one of my staff to take out all the papers from the week and the shredding machine, and everything. And on this one day, for whatever reason, I'd said, no, I'll take it all out. And anyway, there was this paper on the top of the pile, and this paper said, writing tutor, just moved down from Scotland the week before, looking to take on new clients. And it went on to basically explain that none of us newbies think that we're potentially writers, and actually we've all got good stories, and no matter how we can't articulate it and how bad our grammar, which I was definitely bad at grammar because of my problem with dyslexia, that we've all got great stories, and it's just a case of learning the tools how to write.